Mama, I can hear my heart breaking. The words fell from 6-year-old Lila's lips like drops of liquid sorrow, each syllable cutting through Nora's chest, deeper than any surgeon's blade ever could. In the sterile whiteness of the pediatric intensive care unit, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision, a little girl was dying, and she understood exactly what that meant. Nora's hands trembled as she smoothed her daughter's dark curls, the same texture as her own, the same stubborn spirals that had never been tamed, despite years of careful braiding. Lila's skin, usually a rich caramel that glowed with health, had taken on a grayish pallor that made Nora's throat close with terror. "Don't say that, baby," Nora whispered, forcing her voice to remain steady even as her world crumbled around her. "Your heart is strong. It's the strongest heart I know." Lila turned her head on the pillow, her large brown eyes so, much like Ethan's it sometimes hurt to look at them, focusing on her mother with a wisdom that no 6-year-old should possess. "But, Mama, it really is breaking. Not just the sick part, the lonely part too." The machines surrounding them seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. Nora closed her eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. 6 years. 6 years since Ethan had walked out of their tiny apartment, leaving nothing behind but a note on the kitchen counter and a baby who would never know her father's love. "I can't do this. I'm not ready to be a father. Don't try to find me." 23 words that had shattered 2 lives before one of them had even begun to truly live. "Mama," Lila continued, her small voice cutting through the memory, "when I watch the other kids here, they have visitors, grandpas and grandmas and aunties and—" She paused, the word catching in her throat. "Daddies." Nora opened her eyes to find Lila staring at the doorway, where, just an hour earlier, little Sammy from the next room had been swept up in his father's arms, spinning and laughing despite the IV line still attached to his hand. The joy on that child's face had been radiant, infectious, everything Nora wanted for her own daughter, but could never provide alone. "I see how they look at each other," Lila whispered, "like they have a secret language that only daddies and their babies know. And I wonder, what does that feel like?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence, demanding an answer Nora had never been able to give. For 6 years, she had worked 3 jobs, cleaning office buildings before dawn broke over the city, serving lunch to business people who barely acknowledged her existence, and stocking shelves at the 24-hour grocery store while most of the world slept. Every dollar earned, every sacrifice made, all to ensure Lila never felt the absence of what most children took for granted. But children, Nora had learned, felt everything with devastating clarity. "Dr. Lopez wants to talk to us later," Nora said, desperate to change the subject, to move away from the pain that lived in her daughter's eyes. "I know what he's going to say," Lila replied, with that devastating matter-of-factness that had developed over the past few months. "I heard him talking to the nurses. He thinks I can't understand the big words, but I can." Nora's breath caught. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" "That my heart is too tired to keep working much longer, that the medicine isn't helping anymore, that maybe—" Lila's voice grew smaller. "Maybe it's time to say goodbye." The words hit Nora like a freight train. She had known this moment was coming. Dr. Lopez had been preparing her for weeks, but hearing it from her daughter's lips made it devastatingly real. "Lila, baby, it's okay," Nora whispered, reaching out with a hand that seemed too small, too fragile, and touched her mother's face. "I'm not scared about dying, but I am scared about never knowing what it feels like to have a daddy love me just once before I go. I want to know what that feels like." The tears Nora had been holding back finally spilled over, hot and relentless down her cheeks. 6 years of being strong, of being both mother and father, of telling herself that her love was enough, all of it, crumbled in the face of her daughter's simple, heartbreaking wish. "I want someone to pick me up and spin me around and call me his little princess," Lila continued, her voice growing weaker. "I want to know what it's like when a daddy looks at you like you're the most important thing in the whole world. Just once, Mama, before my heart stops working forever." Nora buried her face in her hands, sobs racking her body. How could she explain to a dying child that the man who was supposed to love her had chosen to walk away instead? How could she make Lila understand that some hearts were capable of abandoning what they should cherish most? When she finally looked up, Lila was watching her with those wise, too old eyes. "Maybe," Lila said softly, "maybe there's someone out there who could pretend, just for a little while, just so I can know." The idea was insane, impossible, desperate beyond reason, but as Nora sat there, watching her daughter fade away a little more each day. Desperation began to feel like the only option left. 2 hours later, Dr. Lopez delivered the devastating news Nora had been dreading for weeks. Lila's latest cardiac tests showed critical deterioration. They were looking at days, not weeks. The experimental treatments had failed, and conventional medicine had reached its limits. "I'm sorry, Doctor," Lopez said, his kind eyes filled with genuine regret. "At this point, we're discussing comfort care rather than curative options." The words hit Nora like a physical blow. Even though she'd seen this moment approaching for weeks, hearing it spoken aloud made it devastatingly real. The early evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching rain. People moved past her in all directions. Visitors leaving after their daily hospital calls, medical staff changing shifts, delivery personnel bustling about their business, all of them living their normal lives, while hers fell apart one heartbeat at a time. That's when she saw him. Marcus Hayes stood near the valet station, checking his phone while waiting for his car. Even from a distance, everything about him spoke of success and privilege. The tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nora made in 6 months, the confident way he carried himself, the expensive watch catching the light as he lifted his hand. He was perfect. Too perfect, the kind of man who looked like he could be someone's father, someone's hero, someone's whole world. Before her rational mind could stop her, Nora was walking toward him, her feet moving of their own accord. Each step brought her closer to either salvation or humiliation, but she no longer cared about the difference. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. Marcus looked up from his phone, his green eyes meeting hers with polite curiosity. Up close, he was even more striking. Strong jaw, kind eyes, the sort of face that belonged in boardrooms and magazine covers. "Yes?" he said, his voice warm and professionally courteous. Nora opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. How did someone ask a complete stranger to pretend to be their dying child's father? How did someone explain 6 years of heartbreak in a single conversation? She began, then stopped, tears already threatening again. But then she thought of Lila lying in that hospital bed, dreaming of a love she would never know, and suddenly the words came pouring out. "Will you be the father of my daughter for just one day?" "She's close to death," Nora whispered, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her face. Her hands reached out instinctively, clutching at his coat like it was her last hope in a world that had already taken everything else. Chapter 2. The Stranger's Heart. Marcus Hayes had built his empire on reading people, understanding their motivations, predicting their moves, recognizing desperation, manipulation, and genuine need within seconds of meeting someone. But standing in the hospital's valet area, looking into the tear-stained face of this stranger who had just made the most impossible request he'd ever heard, every instinct he'd honed over 15 years in business screamed conflicting messages. "Walk away. This is insane. This is dangerous. Stay. This is real. This matters." "I'm sorry," Nora said quickly, seeing his shocked expression, her hands dropping from his coat as if she'd been burned. "I'm sorry, that was insane. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, just forget Wait," Marcus said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "What did you say?" Nora wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of mascara across her brown skin. Even disheveled and crying, she was stunning, the kind of natural beauty that didn't need enhancement, that came from strength and grace rather than artifice. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She's 6 years old, and she's dying, and she's never had a father. Her biological father left when she was 2 days old. 2 days. And now she's in there asking me what it feels like to be loved by a daddy, and I don't know how to answer her because I can't give her that." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart. He'd been raised by parents who viewed children as accessories to success rather than human beings to be cherished. The idea of a father abandoning his 2-day-old daughter was so foreign, so incomprehensible, that it made him physically angry. "She doesn't have long," Nora continued, the words tumbling out now as if a dam had burst. "Days, maybe a week. And all she wants is to know what it feels like to have someone call her their little girl. To feel protected and cherished by a man who chose to love her just once before she couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception, manipulation 1,000 small, tells that usually accompanied elaborate cons. He'd been approached by gold diggers and con artists more times than he could count, each with their own tragic story designed to separate him from his wealth. He'd learned to spot the tells, the calculated tears, the rehearsed desperation, the subtle assessments of his worth. But this woman wasn't cataloging his expensive watch or mentally calculating his net worth. She was drowning. And her desperation was so raw, so genuine, that it reached past every defense he'd built and grabbed something in his chest he thought was dead. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Nora." "And my daughter is Lila," she said. The name like a prayer, like it was the most precious word in any language. "Marcus Hayes," he replied automatically, then immediately regretted it. Now she would know exactly who he was, would be able to research his wealth, but Nora's expression didn't change. She wasn't connecting the name to the headlines, wasn't calculating opportunity. She was just a mother, desperate and broken, asking a stranger to give her daughter one perfect moment before the world took her away forever. "I know this is crazy," Nora said, misreading his silence as rejection. "I know you probably think I'm some kind of lunatic or criminal or—" "How long?" Marcus interrupted. "How long would you need me to pretend?" Hope flickered in her eyes like a candle flame in wind. Just a few hours, maybe one afternoon, long enough for her to experience it, to have that memory. I'm not asking for money or anything else, I swear. Just let her feel loved. Let her call you daddy and mean it, even if it's only pretend." Marcus's phone buzzed in his hand, probably his assistant wondering where he was or his driver waiting for instructions. His carefully scheduled evening was waiting for him. Dinner at an exclusive restaurant, review of quarterly reports, preparation for tomorrow's board meeting. His life of predictable luxury and isolated successful of it seemed suddenly, overwhelmingly empty. "Which room?" he heard himself ask. Nora's eyes widened. "You'll do it?" "Which room is she in?" "Pediatric ICU. Room 314. "But are you sure?" "I mean, I don't even know you, and you don't know us, and neither of us knows what we're doing," Marcus said, surprised by his own certainty. "But your daughter deserves to feel loved. And if I can give her that—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish the thought. The truth was more complex than he could easily explain. His childhood had been spent in expensive boarding schools and summer camps, cared for by a succession of nannies and tutors while his parents built their empire. He'd learned early that love was conditional, temporary, something that had to be earned through achievement, rather than simply given. But watching this woman pour out her heart for a dying child, seeing the fierce, protective love that drove her to approach a complete stranger with an impossible request, it awakened something in him that felt like recognition. This was what real love looked like. This was what he'd been missing his entire life, without even knowing it. "Thank you," Nora whispered. Fresh tears, spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay." "Don't," Marcus said firmly. "This isn't about repayment. This is about a little girl who deserves better than what life has given her." They walked back into the hospital together, an unlikely pair. The billionaire in his $1,000 suit and the struggling single mother in her worn jeans and faded sweater. The elevator ride to the third floor was silent, filled with nervous energy and the weight of what they were about to attempt. She might be suspicious at first, Nora warned, as they approached room 314. "She's smart, and she's been disappointed before. She might not believe." The words died in her throat as they reached the doorway. Through the glass panel, they could see Lila sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the darkness. Even from this distance, even with tubes and wires surrounding her, she was beautiful, delicate features, skin the color of café au lait, her mother's expressive eyes in a face that held too much sadness for someone so young. "Oh," Marcus breathed, and something fundamental shifted inside his chest. He'd expected to feel sympathy. Maybe some satisfaction at doing a good deed. He hadn't expected to feel like he'd been punched in the solar plexus, like every protective instinct he'd never known he possessed had suddenly roared to life. Lila turned at the sound of their footsteps, her gaze moving from her mother to the stranger beside her. For a moment, she just stared, taking in Marcus's appearance with the careful assessment children used when meeting new adults. Then Nora stepped forward, her voice gentle but clear. "Lila, sweetheart, I want you to meet someone very special. This is your daddy." The word hung in the air like a held breath. Lila's eyes widened, moving between her mother and Marcus with an expression that cycled through confusion, hope, and heartbreaking weariness. "My daddy?" she whispered, the word coming out like she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it. Marcus found himself moving forward without conscious thought, drawn by an invisible thread to this tiny person who was looking at him like he might be either salvation or another disappointment in a life that had already delivered too many. "Hello, Princess," he said, the endearment coming naturally despite the fact that he'd never called anyone that before in his life. And then, as if she'd been waiting her entire 6 years for this moment, Lila's face lit up like sunrise after the longest night. She opened her thin arms and said the word that would change everything. "Daddy." When Marcus bent down and carefully gathered her into his arms, feeling her tiny heartbeat against his chest, breathing in the scent of hospital soap and strawberry shampoo, he knew with absolute certainty that this was no longer pretend. This was real. This was his daughter, and he would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. Chapter 3. Unexpected Connections. "Tell me about space, Daddy." The request came 3 hours after Marcus had first held Lila in his arms, and he was still reeling from how naturally the word daddy fell from her lips, how it sent warmth flooding through his chest every time she said it. They were settled in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her bed, Lila curled against his side like she'd been doing it her whole life, her small hand resting trustingly on his chest. "Space," Marcus repeated, glancing over at Nora, who was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read, wonder, mixed with something that might have been fear. "Mama says that's where the angels live," Lila explained, her voice still weak but more animated than it had been all day. "And she says when people die, they become stars, so they can watch over the people they love. I want to know about the stars I'm going to become." The casual way she discussed her own death made Marcus's throat tight. He'd known she was sick, but somehow he hadn't fully grasped that this brilliant, beautiful child was actually dying. The reality of it hit him like a physical blow. "Well," he said, his voice rougher than intended, "space is infinite. That means it goes on forever and ever with no end. And there are billions of stars, each one unique and special and absolutely irreplaceable." Lila tilted her head to look up at him. "Like people?" "Exactly like people. And some stars shine so brightly that they light up everything around them. Those are the special ones, the ones that make other stars feel less alone in all that darkness. Is that the kind of star I'll be?" Marcus felt Nora's sharp intake of breath from across the room. When he met her eyes, he saw tears threatening to spill over, saw her biting her lip to keep from crying in front of her daughter. "You already are that kind of star, Princess," Marcus said, meaning every word. "You've been lighting up this whole hospital since the moment I met you." Lila actually giggled, and the sound was so pure and joyful that it made Marcus's chest ache. "Daddy, you're funny." "Am I? I usually think I'm quite serious." "That's what makes it funny," Lila said with the devastating logic that only children possessed. "Serious people saying funny things is the best kind of funny." Over the next hour, Marcus discovered that Lila possessed a rare combination of innocence and insight that both broke his heart and filled him with wonder. She asked about his work with genuine curiosity, listening as he explained that he built companies to help people, then surprised him by suggesting solutions to problems his expensive consultants had been wrestling with for months. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "if you really want to help people, maybe you should help the people who help people too. Like Mama, she works really hard helping others, but nobody takes care of her." The observation hit Marcus squarely in the chest. He glanced at Nora, who was pretending to organize Lila's belongings while obviously listening to every word of their conversation. Her clothes were clean but worn, her shoes practical but scuffed, her entire appearance speaking of someone who prioritized her child's needs over her own without question. "What kind of work does Mama do?" Marcus asked Lila, though he was really asking Nora. "She cleans big buildings when it's still dark outside," Lila explained with obvious pride. "Then she serves lunch to busy people. And at night she organizes all the things at the grocery store. She says work is how we show love. She works for me, and someday, when I'm better, I'll work to help people too." The casual mention of "when I'm better" rather than if made Marcus's chest tight with a mixture of hope and protective determination. This child's unwavering faith in her future gave him something to fight for. "Someday, when you're big," Marcus repeated, his voice firm. "That's right." For the first time since entering this room, he allowed himself to really look at the medical equipment surrounding Lila's bed, to consider what it meant and what options might exist. He'd built his fortune by identifying problems and creating solutions, by refusing to accept that anything was impossible if you had enough resources and determination. A dying 6-year-old was just another problem to solve. "Lila," he said carefully, "how would you feel about getting a second opinion on your heart?" The little girl looked confused. "What's a second opinion?" "It's when we ask another doctor to look at you, just to make sure the first doctor didn't miss anything. But Dr. Lopez is really smart, Lila protested loyally. He knows all about hearts. I'm sure he does, but sometimes even really smart people benefit from working with other really smart people. From across the room, Nora spoke for the first time in an hour. Mr. Hayes, that's very kind, but we can't afford— I'm not asking you to afford anything, Marcus interrupted gently. I'm asking if you'd let me make some phone calls. Nora moved closer to the bed, her expression wary. Why would you do that? You don't even know us. It was a fair question, and one Marcus wasn't sure he could answer honestly. The truth was, he'd known this woman and her daughter for less than 4 hours, but something about them had awakened every protective instinct he'd never known he possessed. Lila's courage in the face of death, Nora's fierce devotion despite overwhelming odds, they represented something pure and real in a world where he'd grown accustomed to artifice and manipulation. Because, he said simply, that's what fathers do. We protect our daughters. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications none of them were quite ready to examine. Nora's eyes widened, and she opened her mouth as if to protest, to remind him that this was supposed to be temporary, pretend, a brief gift to a dying child. But then Lila spoke up, her voice soft but certain. He means it, Mama. I can tell. How can you tell, sweetheart? Nora asked, though her question was directed more at Marcus than at her daughter. Lila shifted in Marcus's arms, looking up at him with those two wise eyes. Because when he looks at me, his eyes get the same way yours do, like I'm the most important thing in the whole world. The observation was so accurate, so perceptive, that it took Marcus's breath away. She was right. Somewhere, in the space of a few hours, this child had become the most important thing in his world. The realization should have terrified him, should have sent him running back to his safe, controlled life of boardrooms and profit margins. Instead, it felt like coming home. Nora, he said quietly, using her name for the first time, let me help, please. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something he hoped she would find. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered, but I need you to understand, we can't pay you back, ever. We don't have anything to offer except— You're offering me the chance to be someone's father, Marcus said, the words coming from somewhere deep in his chest. That's worth more than money. An hour later, as visiting hours came to an end, and Lila finally drifted off to sleep, Marcus found himself reluctant to leave. The little girl was curled on her side, one hand still clutching his fingers, her breathing steady despite the machines monitoring her every heartbeat. She's never slept this peacefully in the hospital, Nora said softly, standing beside his chair. Usually, she has nightmares. What kind of nightmares? Being alone, being forgotten. Nora's voice was barely a whisper. She dreams that everyone leaves, and she's the only person left in the world. The image was heartbreaking, and it explained so much about the way Lila had clung to him. The desperate hope in her eyes when she'd first called him Daddy. I should go, Marcus said reluctantly, gently extricating his fingers from Lila's grip. But I'll be back tomorrow. You don't have to. Yes, he said firmly, standing to face her. I do. They were standing close now, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she held herself like someone braced for the next blow, close enough to notice that despite everything she'd been through, despite the stress and fear and sleepless nights, she was absolutely beautiful. Thank you, she said simply. Don't thank me yet, Marcus replied. Wait until you see what I can do. As he walked toward the elevator, he was already making mental lists of phone calls to make, specialists to contact, favors to call in. Somewhere in the vast network of his business contacts and medical connections, there had to be someone who could help Lila. Someone who could give her more than days or weeks. Someone who could give her a lifetime, because that's what fathers did. They moved heaven and earth for their daughters. Chapter 4. Building Trust. Marcus arrived at the hospital the next morning carrying a bag containing 3 carefully chosen children's books, a stuffed elephant with impossibly soft gray fur, and, most importantly, the business card of Dr. Sofia Alvarez, one of the country's most renowned pediatric cardiologists, who had agreed to review Lila's case. He'd spent the night making calls, leveraging relationships built over 15 years, and calling in favors he'd been saving for emergencies. If this didn't qualify as an emergency, nothing ever would. What he hadn't expected was to find Nora asleep in the chair beside Lila's bed, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck aching for days. her hands still resting protectively on her daughter's arm. The morning light streaming through the window caught the exhaustion etched in her features. The way, even in sleep, she looked like someone braced for bad news. She never left, a soft voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find a nurse, Clara, according to her name, tag-watching him with curious eyes. "She's been here all night," Clara replied quietly. "She's been here every night for the past 2 weeks. We've offered her the family sleeping room, but she won't leave Lila's side. Says she's afraid if she goes to sleep somewhere else, she might miss something important, like her daughter's last words." Marcus thought his chest tightened, like the final moments of the most precious thing in her world. "Good morning, Daddy." Lila's cheerful voice made both adults turn toward the bed. The little girl was sitting up, looking more alert than she had yesterday. Her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that only children could muster in the face of impossible circumstances. "Good morning, Princess," Marcus said, moving to her bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Mama says it's because I finally have a daddy to keep the nightmares away." Lila's matter-of-fact delivery of this observation made Marcus's throat tight with emotion. The sound of their voices woke Nora, who startled awake with the reflexive alertness of someone accustomed to crisis. Her eyes immediately went to Lila, scanning for signs of distress, before landing on Marcus with surprise. "You came back," she said, and the wonder in her voice suggested she hadn't really believed he would. "I told you I would." Marcus set the bag down and pulled out the stuffed elephant. "This is for you, Lila. I thought you might like a friend to keep you company." Lila's eyes went wide as she accepted the elephant, hugging it against her chest with the fierce affection children reserved for their most treasured possessions. "He's perfect. What's his name?" "That's up to you. He's yours now." "Oliver," Lila said immediately. "His name is Oliver, and he's going to help me be brave." Marcus felt something shift in his chest at the name choice, so mature, so thoughtful for a 6-year-old. "Oliver is a wonderful name," Marcus began, weariness creeping into his voice. "You really don't need to bring gifts," Nora interrupted. "This isn't. It's about whatever I choose to make it about." Marcus interrupted gently but firmly. "And I choose to make it about being her father in every way that matters." The word landed between them like a declaration of war against everything that had tried to hurt this family. Nora's eyes widened, searching his face for signs of deception or temporary sentiment, but finding only steady resolve. But Lila spoke first. "Can we read together, Daddy?" "I love stories." "What kind of stories do you like?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Adventure stories and fairy tales," Lila replied, "but not the scary ones where people die at the end." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd had enough real-life fear to last several lifetimes. Marcus pulled out the first book, a collection of modern fairy tales with happy endings, and began to read. His voice, trained by years of boardroom presentations, was perfect for storytelling, and soon Lila was completely absorbed in the adventures of brave princesses and kind-hearted dragons. Nora watched from her chair, her expression cycling between gratitude and concern. Every kindness Marcus showed her daughter, every gentle touch and patient answer made this situation more complicated. This wasn't supposed to be real. This wasn't supposed to last. But watching them together, seeing the way Lila bloomed under his attention, and the way Marcus seemed to transform into someone softer, more human when he looked at her daughter, Nora felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Nora," Marcus said during a break between stories, "when was the last time you went home, had a proper meal, slept in a real bed?" "I'm fine," she said automatically, the response of someone who'd been managing alone for so long that accepting help felt foreign and dangerous. "You're exhausted," Marcus replied matter-of-factly, "and Lila needs you to take care of yourself so you can take care of her." "Mama," Lila said suddenly, "you should listen to Daddy. He's very smart about taking care of people." "How do you know that?" Nora asked her daughter. "Because he took care of me yesterday when I was scared about the needles, and he took care of you by making your sad eyes happy again." The observation was so perceptive, so accurate, that both adults fell silent. It was true. For the first time in weeks, Nora had slept peacefully, had felt some of the crushing weight of responsibility lift from her shoulders, not because her problems had been solved, but because, for the first time since Ethan had walked away, she wasn't carrying them alone. "Doctor, Lopez wants to see us this afternoon," Nora said quietly, changing the subject. "He has the results from yesterday's tests." Marcus nodded. "I'd like to be there, if that's okay with you." "You would?" Nora asked, surprised. "I meant what I said yesterday about being her father, about protecting her." That includes being present for the hard conversations. Nora studied his face, searching for signs of insincerity or hidden motives. She'd been disappointed by people before, not just Ethan, but a string of friends and family members who'd promised support and then disappeared when things got difficult. Self-preservation demanded that she remain skeptical, that she protect herself and Lila from another abandonment. But looking at Marcus now, seeing the way he held her daughter like she was made of spun glass and precious metals, Nora felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 years. Hope. "Okay," she said finally. "You can come with us." The afternoon meeting with Dr. Lopez was everything Nora had been dreading. The test results were worse than expected. Lila's heart function was declining rapidly, and the medications that had been keeping her stable were becoming less effective. "I'm sorry, doctor," Lopez said, his kind eyes filled with genuine regret. "At this point, we're looking at comfort care rather than curative treatment. I wish I had better news." Marcus listened to the doctor's explanation with the focused intensity he usually reserved for hostile takeovers, asking detailed questions about treatment options, experimental procedures, anything that might change the prognosis. But Dr. Lopez's answers remained consistent. Lila's condition was too advanced, her heart too damaged for any of the available treatments to be effective. "What about a transplant?" Marcus asked finally. "Doctor," Lopez shook his head sadly, "she's not strong enough for the surgery, and her other organ systems are too compromised. I'm afraid that's not an option." "How long?" Nora whispered, the words barely audible. "Days, maybe a week if we're fortunate." The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. Nora closed her eyes, fighting back tears, while Marcus felt a rage so pure and fierce that it threatened to consume him. This brilliant, beautiful child who'd brought light into his life was being taken away, and all the money and power and connections in the world couldn't stop it. "Thank you, doctor," Marcus said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "We appreciate your honesty." After Dr. Lopez left, they sat in the small consultation room in heavy silence. Nora was crying now, quiet tears that spoke of exhaustion and grief, and the terrible knowledge that soon she would be alone again. "Nora," Marcus said softly. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't say it's going to be okay, or that everything happens for a reason, or any of the other things people say when they don't know what else to do." "I wasn't going to say any of those things," Marcus replied. "I was going to say that you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, however long we have, you're not going through it alone anymore." Nora looked up at him through her tears. "Why? Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything." "Because," Marcus said, reaching out to take her hand, "in 2 days, you and Lila have given me something I didn't even know I was missing. You've made me feel like I matter for reasons that have nothing to do with money or success or power. You've made me feel like a father." Their hands were still joined when they walked back to Lila's room, and something had fundamentally shifted between them. What had started as a desperate stranger's plea had become something deeper, more complex. They were no longer just two people helping a dying child. They were becoming a family fragile and new, and built on the foundation of shared love for a little girl who deserved so much more time than the world was willing to give her. But families, Marcus was learning, weren't always about time. Sometimes they were about moments perfect, precious moments that burned bright enough to illuminate the darkness ahead. Chapter 5. The Deepening Bond. 3 days after Dr. Lopez delivered his devastating prognosis, Marcus walked into Lila's hospital room with the focused energy of a man who had spent every waking moment since then, making impossible things possible. "Good morning, Princess," he said, his voice carefully controlled despite the urgency thrumming through his veins. Behind his calm exterior, he'd been working frantically. Private jets chartered, medical consultations arranged, specialists contacted across 3 time zones. Lila looked up from the coloring book she'd been working on with Nora, her face brightening in the way that had become as essential to Marcus as breathing. "Daddy, look what Mama and I made." She held up a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall man in a suit, a woman with curly hair, and a small girl with a crown above them. She'd colored a rainbow in careful, precise strokes, and underneath, in her careful 6-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "My family." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. 3 days ago, he'd been a successful but solitary man whose greatest emotional attachment was to his quarterly profit reports. Now, looking at this simple drawing, he felt his entire world realign itself around this tiny person and her fierce, beautiful mother. "It's perfect," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "It's the most perfect thing I've ever seen. You can have it," Lila said generously. "So when you go to work, you can remember that you have a family waiting for you." Nora looked up sharply at her daughter's words, her eyes finding Marcus's with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. The reality was that this wasn't supposed to be permanent, wasn't supposed to be real, but somewhere in the space of 3 days, the lines between pretense and truth had blurred beyond recognition. "Lila," Marcus said carefully, "how would you feel about taking a trip?" "A trip?" Lila's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that children reserved for the most extraordinary possibilities. "Where?" "There's a hospital in Houston that specializes in hearts like yours. They have doctors there who might be able to help you in ways that the doctors here can't." Nora's head snapped up, her expression immediately wary. "Marcus, we talked about this. Dr. Lopez was very clear." "Dr. Lopez is one doctor," Marcus interrupted gently. "Dr. Sofia Alvarez at Texas Children's Hospital is another. She's agreed to see Lila, to review her case, to explore options that might not be available here." "And how exactly are we supposed to get to Houston?" Nora asked, her voice tight with the frustration of someone who'd learned not to hope for things beyond her reach. "How are we supposed to afford specialists and second opinions and—" "You're not," Marcus said simply. "I am." The silence that followed was loaded with implications, none of them were quite ready to examine. Nora stood up from her chair, moving to the window, her back rigid with tension. "This isn't what we agreed to," she said quietly. "You said one day, you said just long enough for her to feel loved by a father. This is something else entirely." "Yes," Marcus said, his voice steady. "It is, Mama," Lila said softly. "What's wrong?" Nora turned back to face them, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Baby, Daddy is offering to do something very generous, but it's complicated. Hospitals and doctors cost a lot of money, and we can't—" "I'm not asking you to pay for anything," Marcus said firmly. "I'm asking you to let me be her father in every way that matters, including making sure she gets the best possible care." "Why?" Nora whispered. "Why would you do this for strangers?" "Because you're not strangers," Marcus replied, looking directly into her eyes. "Not anymore. Because when I look at Lila, I see my daughter, and when I look at you, I see—" He paused, the words catching in his throat. "What?" Nora asked, her voice barely audible. "I see someone I could love," he said simply. "Someone I think I already do love." The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was quite brave enough to cross. Nora's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise, while Lila looked between them with the kind of perceptive understanding that children possessed when it came to matters of the heart. "Do you love Mama too, Daddy?" Lila asked innocently. "Because she gets that same look in her eyes when she watches you." Both adults turned to stare at the little girl, who continued coloring as if she hadn't just articulated the truth that neither of them had been brave enough to speak aloud. "Lila," Nora began. "It's okay, Mama," Lila said matter-of-factly. "Love is good. Love makes people brave enough to do hard things." And suddenly, Nora understood. This wasn't about money or charity or temporary kindness. This was about a man who'd looked into the eyes of a dying child and found something worth fighting for. This was about a love that had grown in the space of days from nothing into something that felt essential, permanent, real. "The trip to Houston," she said finally. "What would that involve?" "A private jet to get us there quickly and comfortably," Marcus replied, his voice carefully neutral, as if he were discussing the weather rather than offering to spend what most people would consider a fortune. "A consultation with Dr. Alvarez and her team, whatever tests or procedures they recommend, and if there's a treatment option available, pursuing it, regardless of cost. And if there isn't," Nora asked quietly, "then we bring her home, and we make sure every moment she has left is filled with love and joy and everything a little girl deserves." Nora closed her eyes, fighting a battle between hope and pragmatism that had been raging in her chest since the moment she'd first asked this stranger to pretend to be her daughter's father. Part of her wanted to protect herself and Lila from the inevitable disappointment, from the crushing return to reality when this fairy tale ended, but another part of her, the part that had watched her daughter bloom under Marcus's attention, that had felt her own walls crumbling in the face of his genuine care, wanted to be brave enough to accept this gift. "Mama," Lila said softly, "can I tell you a secret?" Nora opened her eyes and moved back to her daughter's bedside. "Of course, sweetheart." "I think maybe I'm not ready to become a star yet," Lila whispered. "I think maybe I want to stay here and be part of our family for a little longer." The words were so hopeful, so full of the kind of faith that only children possessed, that Nora felt her last defenses crumble entirely. How could she deny her daughter this chance? However remote, however impossible it might seem. "Okay," she said, looking up at Marcus. "Okay, we'll go to Houston." The relief that flooded Marcus's features was so profound that Nora realized how much this meant to him, how invested he'd become in fighting for Lila's life. This wasn't just about helping strangers anymore. This was about protecting his family. "There's one more thing," Marcus said carefully. "Dr. Alvarez wants to see Lila as soon as possible. We need to leave tonight." "Tonight?" Nora felt a familiar surge of panic at how quickly her carefully controlled world was spinning beyond her grasp. "I know it's fast," Marcus said, "but every day matters now. Every hour could make a difference." As if summoned by the urgency in his voice, Dr. Lopez appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Lila's afternoon labs show some concerning changes. We need to discuss adjusting her medications." Marcus stood immediately, moving to stand beside Nora as they faced the doctor together. The gesture was instinctive, protective, the behavior of a man claiming his place as father and partner, without question. "What kind of changes?" Nora asked, her voice tight with fear. "Her heart function has declined more rapidly than we anticipated." Dr. Lopez replied gently. "I'm afraid we may be looking at hours rather than days." The words hit the room like a bomb blast, leaving destruction and silence in their wake. Nora felt her knees buckle, felt the world tilt dangerously on its axis. But before she could fall, Marcus's arm was around her waist, steady and strong and absolutely unshakable. "Then we leave now," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "I'm getting them to Houston tonight." "Mr. Hayes," Dr. Lopez began, "I understand your desire to help, but transporting a child in Lila's condition is going to happen, whether it's risky or not," Marcus interrupted. "Because sitting here waiting for her to die isn't an option. Not for me, not for us." As if to punctuate his words, Lila's monitors began beeping more rapidly, her small face growing pale as she struggled for breath. Nurses rushed into the room, adjusting medications and oxygen levels, their professional calm doing nothing to mask the urgency of the situation. And in that moment, as Nora watched her daughter fight for every breath while the man she was falling in love with made phone calls to arrange the impossible, she understood that this was no longer about pretense or temporary comfort. This was about survival, about family, about love strong enough to move mountains, or at least strong enough to move heaven and earth to save one small girl who deserved so much more time than the world seemed willing to give her. Chapter 6. Challenges and Revelations. The private jet Marcus had chartered was a marvel of luxury and medical equipment, with a full cardiac monitoring system and a flight nurse who specialized in pediatric critical care. As they soared through the night sky toward Houston, Lila slept peacefully for the first time in days, her small hand clutched in Marcus's while her monitors showed stable readings. Nora sat across from them, torn between wonder and growing unease. Every kindness Marcus showed Lila, every gentle gesture and patient answer made their situation more complicated. What had begun as a desperate plea for one day of pretend, fatherhood had evolved into something that felt permanent, real, essential. But with that reality came vulnerability she wasn't sure she was brave enough to embrace. "You need to sleep," Marcus said softly, noticing the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "I can't," Nora replied automatically. "What if something changes? What if she needs me and I'm not here?" The response revealed everything, her bone-deep terror of failing her daughter, the hypervigilance that had kept them both alive through 6 years of struggle, the inability to trust that someone else might share the weight of responsibility. "Then I'll wake you immediately," Marcus promised. "But Nora, you haven't really slept in weeks. You're running on pure adrenaline and willpower, and that's not sustainable." She wanted to argue, to maintain the hypervigilance that had become second nature since Lila's diagnosis. But the combination of exhaustion and the first real hope she'd felt in months was overwhelming her defenses. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said suddenly, the words coming out more sharply than she'd intended. "People don't just adopt strangers' problems, especially not problems this big, this expensive, this hopeless." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on Lila's small hand. "When I was Lila's age," he said finally, "I spent 6 weeks in the hospital with pneumonia. My parents visited exactly twice, once when I was admitted, once when I was discharged. They sent their assistant to handle everything in between. Nora felt her chest tighten at the pain hidden beneath his matter-of-fact delivery. I used to watch the other kids with their families, Marcus continued. Parents who slept in uncomfortable chairs, who read the same story 50 times, who fought with doctors and insurance companies, and anyone else who stood between them and their child's well-being. And I wondered what it would feel like to matter that much to someone. Marcus, I'm 42 years old, he said, looking up to meet her eyes. I've built companies, made fortunes, achieved everything I thought I wanted, but I've never felt as essential, as needed, as important as I have in the last 3 days watching you love your daughter. The admission hung between them, raw and honest and more intimate than any physical touch. Nora felt tears prick her eyes, not just for the lonely child he'd been, but for the man who'd found his purpose in loving them. You matter, she said softly. To us, you matter more than you could possibly know. The call came at 2:47 a.m., jarring Nora from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. The number was blocked, but something instinct or dread made her answer. Nora, it's Ethan. 6 years of silence, and his voice was exactly the same. That particular combination of charm and selfishness that had once fooled her into thinking he was capable of love, now, it just made her blood run cold. How did you get this number? She asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Social media is a wonderful thing, Ethan replied with casual cruelty, especially when concerned friends start posting about medical fundraisers and private jets to Houston. Amazing how quickly word spreads when there's money involved. Nora's blood ran cold as she realized her mistake. In her desperation, she'd allowed friends from work to set up a crowdfunding page, not realizing it would create a digital trail that led directly back to them. The casual cruelty of his phrasing someone's kid, as if Lila wasn't his daughter, hit Nora like a physical blow. Marcus's head snapped up at the mention of the name, his eyes immediately alert and protective. He'd heard enough about Lila's biological father to feel nothing but contempt for the man who'd abandoned them. I heard about Lila, Ethan continued, his voice carrying what might have been concern if Nora were generous enough to interpret it that way. I saw something on social media about her being sick. Is it true? How did you get this number? Nora asked, her voice tight with anger she'd been carrying for 6 years. That doesn't matter. What matters is our daughter. Our daughter? Nora's voice rose, causing Lila to stir slightly in her sleep. She lowered her tone but lost none of her fury. You gave up the right to call her our anything when you walked out on a 2-day-old baby. I was young, Ethan said, and Nora could hear the whining justification she remembered so well. I was scared. He made a mistake. A mistake? Nora could barely contain her rage. Abandoning your child isn't a mistake, Ethan. It's a choice, a deliberate, conscious choice to prioritize your own comfort over your daughter's well-being. Marcus reached out and took her free hand, his touch grounding her, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this anymore. I want to make it right, Ethan continued. I want to be part of her life. I want to help. Help? Nora laughed bitterly. Where were you when she took her first steps? When she said her first word? Where were you during the sleepless nights when she had nightmares or when she asked me why she didn't have a daddy like the other kids? I'm here now, Ethan said, and there was something in his tone that made Nora's skin crawl. She already has a father, Nora said firmly, looking directly at Marcus. She has a man who loves her, who protects her, who puts her needs before his own everything. You never were and never will be. Who is he? Ethan's voice took on an ugly edge. Some boyfriend you're using to replace me? Someone better than you in every possible way, Nora replied. Someone who chose to love her, who didn't need biology to make him step up and be a man. Look, Nora, I know you're angry, but I have rights. I'm her biological father, and if she's really as sick as people are saying, then maybe it's time for me to— Nora hung up the phone, her hands shaking with fury, and something that might have been fear. After 6 years of silence, Ethan's sudden interest in Lila felt calculated, opportunistic, and the mention of his rights made her stomach churn with dread. That was him, she said unnecessarily. I gathered, Marcus replied, his voice carefully controlled. What did he want? To suddenly be a father, apparently, after 6 years of pretending we don't exist. Nora closed her eyes, fighting back the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. He mentioned his rights, Marcus, his legal rights. He has no rights, Marcus said firmly. He abandoned you. He's provided no support, financial or emotional. No court in the country would— He's her biological father, Nora interrupted. That means something legally, even if it means nothing morally. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the hum of the jet engines and Lila's steady breathing. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Nora, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you earlier." The seriousness in his tone made her stomach clench with dread. "What?" "The medical expenses, the private jet, the consultation with Dr. Alvarez. It's not just charity. It's not just me trying to help strangers." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to adopt Lila legally. I want to marry you and become her father in every way that matters." The words hit Nora like a physical blow. "What?" "I love her," Marcus said simply. "I love both of you. What started as pretense has become the most real thing in my life. I want to build a family with you, to give Lila everything she deserves, to protect both of you from people like Ethan, who only show up when it's convenient for them." Nora stared at him, her mind reeling. "Marcus, we've known each other for 3 days. You can't just decide to marry someone and adopt their child based on 3 days." "Why not?" Marcus asked. "I've made business decisions worth millions based on less information and shorter timelines. This isn't about business. This is about love, about family, about doing whatever it takes to protect the people who matter most." "But what if she doesn't get better?" Nora whispered. "What if Dr. Alvarez can't help her either? Would you still want to marry a woman whose daughter you'd only have for days or weeks?" Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense and absolutely certain. "Nora, I fell in love with Lila knowing she was dying. If all we get is days or weeks, then I want every moment of that time to be filled with love and security and the knowledge that she's cherished. I want her last memories to be of having a father who would move heaven and earth for her. And if she lives, if Dr. Alvarez finds a way to save her, then I want to spend the rest of my life being her father and your husband." The simple certainty in his voice took Nora's breath away. After 6 years of doing everything alone, of being both mother and father, of carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, the idea of sharing that burden, of having a true partner, was almost too wonderful to believe. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of believing this is real, of trusting that you won't disappear when things get difficult, of letting Lila get even more attached to you if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said firmly. "Not ever. Whether Lila lives or dies, whether you marry me or not, I'm not walking away from this family. You're stuck with me." As if summoned by their conversation, Lila stirred awake, her eyes opening to find both adults watching her with expressions of fierce love and protection. "Are we almost there, Daddy?" she asked sleepily. "Almost, Princess," Marcus replied, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "Just a little while longer." "Good," Lila said, snuggling closer to him. "I had the best dream. I dreamed that we were a real family forever and ever, and nobody could take us apart." Looking at her daughter's peaceful expression, at the man who'd become essential to both their lives in the space of days, Nora felt something she'd thought was lost forever, the belief that dreams could come true, even if nightmares sometimes came calling first. Chapter 7. The past confronts the present. Texas Children's Hospital in Houston was a gleaming testament to hope and cutting-edge medicine. Its walls lined with artwork created by young patients and photographs of children who'd beaten the odds. Dr. Sofia Alvarez met them in the pediatric cardiac wing, her reputation preceding her like a beacon of possibility in the darkness that had surrounded Lila's diagnosis. "She's beautiful," Dr. Alvarez said after her initial examination, her kind eyes studying Lila with the intensity of someone who saw miracles as daily possibilities rather than distant dreams, and stronger than her test results suggest. They were gathered in her office, Nora clutching Marcus's hand like a lifeline, Lila curled in Marcus's lap wearing a hospital gown decorated with cartoon hearts, and Dr. Alvarez reviewing the comprehensive tests her team had conducted over the past 18 hours. "The damage to her heart is significant," Dr. Alvarez continued, "but there's an experimental procedure we've been developing. It's risky, requiring multiple surgeries over several months, and the success rate is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Limited." "How limited?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the way his arms tightened protectively around Lila. 10% survival rate, Dr. Alvarez replied with the honesty that made her one of the most respected physicians in her field. But for children in Lila's condition, it represents the only real hope available. The number settled over them like a weight, but Lila surprised them all by nodding thoughtfully. 10% is better than 0%, she said with startling pragmatism, and I'm pretty good at doing impossible things. Her matter-of-fact assessment of her own chances would have been heartbreaking, if not for the quiet confidence in her voice. This was a child who had spent her entire life beating odds, and she had no intention of stopping now. 3 separate surgeries, each one complex and dangerous. Months of recovery between procedures. The possibility of complications that could... Dr. Alvarez glanced at Lila, who was listening with the attention of someone far older than her 6 years, the possibility of making things worse rather than better, but also the possibility of making me all better. Lila asked with the straightforward logic that only children possessed. Yes, sweetheart, Dr. Alvarez replied gently. Also that possibility. Lila considered this information with the seriousness of a board member reviewing a critical decision. Daddy, what do you think? The question stopped Marcus's breath. 3 days ago, he'd been a stranger. Now, a dying child was asking him to help make the most important decision of her short life. I think, he said carefully, that 10% is 10% more than we had yesterday, and I think you're the bravest person I know, which means if anyone can beat those odds, it's you. And if I don't beat them? Lila asked with devastating matter-of-factness. Then we'll have tried everything possible, and you'll know that everyone who loves you fought as hard as they could to keep you here. Lila nodded solemnly, then turned to her mother. Mama, are you brave enough to let me try? The question shattered Nora's heart into a million pieces. How could she say yes to subjecting her daughter to months of agony for a 10% chance? How could she say no to the only hope they had? I'm brave enough for anything when it comes to you, Nora whispered. Then we try, Lila said decisively. We try to beat the 10%. Dr. Alvarez smiled, the expression transforming her serious face into something radiant. In that case, we need to move quickly. I'd like to schedule the first surgery for next week, which means... A commotion in the hallway interrupted her. Raised voices, someone arguing with hospital security. The sound of conflict that made every protective instinct in Marcus's body flare to life. I'm her biological father, a familiar voice shouted. I have legal rights to see my daughter, and your security can't stop me. Nora went rigid in her chair, her face draining of color. No. He followed us here. Ethan appeared in the doorway before security could escort him out, flanked by a man in an expensive suit who was clearly his attorney. Ethan looked exactly as Nora remembered, handsome in a shallow way, with the kind of confidence that came from never being truly held accountable for his actions. Hello, Nora, Ethan said, his tone sickeningly sweet. Thanks for making it so easy to track you down. Social media posts about miracle surgeries in Houston really narrowed down the search. I see you got my message. Get out, Nora said. Standing so quickly her chair toppled backward. Get out right now. I'm afraid I can't do that, Ethan replied, his eyes moving to Lila with what he probably thought looked like paternal concern. I'm here to see my daughter. Your daughter? Marcus's voice was deadly quiet as he stood, moving slightly in front of Lila in an instinctively protective gesture. Your daughter is the child you abandoned 6 years ago. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he took in Marcus's expensive clothes, confident bearing, and protective stance. And you are? I'm her father. Marcus replied simply. No, Ethan said, his voice taking on an ugly edge. You're not. I am. Biologically, legally, I am her father, and I'm here to claim my rights. Ethan's eyes moved around the expensive private room, cataloging details with the calculating assessment of someone evaluating potential profit. The luxury, the private specialists, the obvious wealth backing Lila's care. It all added up to opportunity in his mind. I've done my research on your new friend here, Ethan said, his gaze settling on Marcus with undisguised avarice. Marcus Hayes, net worth somewhere north of 50 million, recently divorced, no children of his own. Playing daddy to a dying kid must make him feel very noble. The words were designed to wound, to suggest that Marcus's love for Lila was nothing more than a wealthy man's charity project, but they revealed more about Ethan's character than they did about Marcus's motivations. The mercenary calculation in his tone made Marcus's hands clench into fists. You mean it's time you started looking for a way to profit from her illness, Marcus said. I don't know what you're implying, Ethan said with false innocence, but I'm simply a concerned father who wants to be involved in his daughter's care. Concerned father? Nora's voice was shaking with fury. You've been gone for 6 years without a phone call, a birthday card, a single dollar in child support. You don't get to show up now and play concerned father. People change, Ethan said sanctimoniously. I've grown up, taken responsibility for my mistakes. I want to be part of Lila's life. No. The small voice from the hospital bed cut through all the adult posturing like a knife. Everyone turned to look at Lila, who was sitting up straight, her young face set with determination. No, you can't be my father. Ethan's expression faltered slightly. Sweetheart, I know this is confusing, but I'm your real daddy. This man is he's my real daddy," Lila interrupted, pointing at Marcus. "You're just the man who made me but didn't want me." The words hit Ethan like a slap, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "You don't understand the situation, Lila. You're too young to make these kinds of decisions. I'm old enough to know who loves me," Lila replied with devastating simplicity. "And I'm old enough to know who left me." Dr. Alvarez, who had been watching this confrontation with growing alarm, stepped forward. "I'm going to have to ask everyone to lower their voices. This is a hospital, and Lila needs to remain calm before her surgery." "Surgery?" Ethan's lawyer immediately perked up. "What surgery? We weren't informed of any planned procedures." "Because you have no right to be informed," Nora snapped. "You abandoned your parental rights when you walked away." "That's not how the law works," the lawyer replied smoothly. "Mr. Turner's parental rights were never legally terminated. He has every right to be consulted on medical decisions for his biological daughter." "Then we'll terminate them now," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "I'm adopting Lila, and I'll fight anyone who tries to stop that." Ethan laughed, the sound cold and calculating. "You can't adopt a child without both biological parents' consent, and I'm not consenting to anything until I understand exactly what kind of financial arrangements are being made for my daughter's care." The truth was finally out in the open. Ethan wasn't here out of love or concern for Lila. He was here because he'd somehow learned about Marcus's wealth and saw an opportunity to profit from the daughter he'd abandoned. "You want money?" Marcus asked quietly. "I want what's best for my daughter," Ethan replied, but his eyes were calculating, "and I think her biological father should have some say in how her medical care is funded." "Daddy," Lila said softly, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Make the bad man go away." The simple request, delivered with absolute trust in Marcus's ability to protect her, galvanized everyone in the room. Nora felt her love for this man deepen even further as she watched him step fully into the role of protector and father. "Security," Marcus said, pulling out his phone, "and my attorney." Now, as he made his calls, Ethan and his lawyer exchanged glances that spoke of plans and strategies and legal maneuvers designed to extract maximum profit from a dying child's desperate situation, but they had underestimated two things: the fierce, protective love of a mother who'd fought alone for 6 years, and the unlimited resources of a man who'd found his purpose in protecting this small family. The war for Lila's future was about to begin, but Ethan had no idea what kind of opponent he'd chosen to face. Marcus Hayes hadn't built an empire by accepting defeat, and he certainly wasn't going to start when it came to protecting his daughter. Chapter 8. Love in Crisis. The next 72 hours became a blur of legal consultations, medical preparations, and emotional warfare, as Ethan and his attorney launched an aggressive campaign to gain control of Lila's medical decisions and access to the fortune being spent on her care. But Marcus's legal team, led by the formidable Patricia Lee, proved to be more than a match for Ethan's opportunistic maneuvering. "He's overplayed his hand," Patricia explained during an emergency meeting in a conference room overlooking the Houston skyline. "Abandoning a child for 6 years without any support or contact, then suddenly appearing only when expensive medical care is involved. No judge with half a brain will see this as anything other than a transparent money grab." Nora sat beside Marcus, her hand intertwined with his, drawing strength from his steady presence as they navigated the legal maze that threatened to delay Lila's surgery. "But he is her biological father," she said quietly. "That has to count for something legally. It counts for very little when weighed against abandonment and his obvious mercenary motives," Patricia replied firmly. "Especially when we have a man willing to legally adopt her and take full financial responsibility for her care." Through the conference room's glass walls, they could see Lila in her hospital room, playing quietly with Oliver the elephant, while nurses monitored her increasingly fragile condition. Every hour of legal delay was an hour. Her small heart grew weaker, an hour closer to the point where even the experimental surgery might not be an option. "How long?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "I can have emergency custody orders blocked within 24 hours, Patricia promised, "and I can expedite the adoption paperwork. But even with emergency filings, we're looking at 48 to 72 hours minimum. That's if everything goes perfectly and Ethan doesn't challenge." "We don't have 72 hours, Marcus said urgently. "Lila's surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning." "Then we need the nuclear option," Patricia replied grimly. "Emergency marriage with immediate step-parent adoption filing. It's legally bulletproof, but it means making a permanent decision under crisis circumstances. Marcus looked at Nora, his green eyes reflecting the same mixture of love and determination she felt, burning in her own chest. "We're certain," he said without hesitation. "There's one more thing," Patricia continued, her expression growing serious. "The fastest way to resolve this completely is if you two are married. The parent adoption with spousal consent carries much more legal weight than a single man trying to adopt a child whose biological father is contesting married." Nora felt the words stick in her throat, not from reluctance, but from the sheer impossibility that something so wonderful could happen in the middle of their nightmare. "It would eliminate Ethan's legal standing entirely," Patricia explained practically. "Parent adoption with spousal consent, combined with documented abandonment, creates an unassailable legal position. More importantly, it would give both of you immediate medical decision-making authority." Marcus turned to face Nora fully, taking her hands in his. The weight of what he was about to ask, what they were about to do, settled between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. "I know this seems insane," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know we've only known each other for a week, and that normal people don't fall in love during a medical crisis. But there's nothing normal about what we've been through together. When you watch someone fight for their child's life, when you see them make impossible sacrifices with absolute grace, you see who they really are." Nora felt tears streaming down her face as his words washed over her. "Let me finish," Marcus said gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I've seen your strength, your courage, your heart. I've seen how you love completely, fiercely, without reservation. I've watched you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and still find ways to make your daughter smile. I've seen you choose hope when despair would have been easier. Choose trust when betrayal was all you'd ever known. You don't know everything about me," Nora whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't know how scared I am, how many times I've failed her, how many nights I've lain awake wondering if I'm enough." "I know enough," Marcus replied firmly. "I know that you've been enough for 6 years, all by yourself. I know that you're the strongest person I've ever met, and the most beautiful, and the most deserving of love. And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that kind of love, worthy of being Lila's father, worthy of being your husband." The word hung between them, husband loaded with promises and possibilities, and the terrifying beauty of choosing love in the face of loss. "What if she doesn't make it?" Nora asked, voicing the fear that lived in both their hearts. "What if we do this? We make this commitment, and then we lose her? What if you wake up married to a woman whose daughter you'd only have for days or weeks?" Marcus's eyes never left hers as he answered. "Then I'll wake up married to the woman who showed me what love really means, the woman who taught me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how impossible they seem, the woman who made me a father, even if only for a week. And if she lives," Nora whispered, "then we get to spend the rest of our lives watching her grow up, celebrating every milestone, arguing about curfews and college choices and wedding plans. We get to be her parents together, for as long as we're blessed to have her." Nora closed her eyes, feeling the last of her defenses crumble. After 6 years of protecting herself and Lila from disappointment, from abandonment, from the kind of hope that could destroy them if it proved false, she was choosing to be brave enough to believe in this impossible love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Nora felt her chest tighten with a mixture of fear and hope that threatened to overwhelm her. She looked at Marcus, this man who'd appeared in their lives like a miracle and somehow become essential to their survival, and saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. "Nora," he said softly, turning to face her fully, "this isn't how I imagined proposing to you." "You were planning to propose?" The question came out breathless, amazed. "I've been planning to propose since the moment I realized I loved you," Marcus replied simply. "I just thought we'd have more time, more normal circumstances. But if Lila has taught me anything, it's that love doesn't wait for perfect timing." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks as she looked at this man who'd fought for her daughter, who'd become the father Lila had always deserved, who'd somehow made her believe in fairy tales again, despite the nightmare they were living through. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Patricia smiled, the expression transforming her serious face. "In that case, I know a judge who can perform the ceremony today. We can have it done right here in the hospital, with Lila as your witness." 2 hours later, in the small chapel attached to Texas Children's Hospital, Nora became Nora Hayes in a ceremony that was simultaneously the most unconventional and most perfect wedding imaginable. The chapel itself was simple but beautiful, with stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across polished wooden pews. Fresh flowers from the hospital's garden center had been hastily arranged into bouquets, and someone had found battery-operated candles to create a warm, intimate glow despite the fluorescent hospital lighting. Nora wore a simple navy blue dress that Marcus had somehow managed to have delivered within hours, the fabric soft and elegant against her skin. It wasn't the wedding dress she dreamed of as a little girl, but it was perfect for this moment, for this man, for this impossible love story they were writing together. Marcus stood beside her in a fresh white shirt and charcoal slacks, his expensive suit jacket abandoned in favor of clothes that felt more like himself, less like the billionaire businessman, and more like the man who'd fallen in love with a dying child and her fierce mother. Lila sat in her wheelchair between them, wearing a flower crown made from white daisies and baby's breath that a kind nurse had woven together. She held 2 simple gold bands in her small hands wedding rings from the hospital gift shop that cost $30, but felt more precious than any diamond. Do you, Marcus James Hayes, take Nora Marie Tate to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Marcus said, his voice steady and sure as he looked into Nora's eyes. I do. And I promise to love not just you, but the beautiful daughter you're trusting me to protect. I promise to be the father she deserves and the husband you've always been worth waiting for. Do you, Nora Marie Tate, take Marcus James Hayes to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Nora whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. I do. And I promise to love you for seeing us when we were invisible, for choosing us when we had nothing to offer but hope, for making us believe in happy endings again. As Marcus slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Nora felt something shift inside her chest, not just the joy of marrying the man she loved, but the profound relief of no longer carrying the weight of the world alone. For the first time in 6 years, she had a true partner, someone who would share both the burdens and the blessings of loving Lila. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. The kiss that sealed their marriage was gentle, tender, and full of promises for a future they were both determined to fight for. When they broke apart, Lila was clapping her hands with pure joy, her laughter filling the small chapel with music more beautiful than any wedding march. Now I really have a daddy forever, she said with satisfaction. Even if the bad man tries to take me away, I have a real family now. Later that evening, after the legal papers had been signed and Lila had fallen asleep clutching both their hands, Nora and Marcus found themselves alone in the small family room adjacent to the pediatric ward. The reality of what they'd done was beginning to sink in. They were married, legally bound together in the midst of the greatest crisis of their lives. Mrs. Hayes, Marcus said softly, testing how the name sounded. Mr. Hayes, Nora replied, a small smile playing at her lips despite the exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones. That's going to take some getting used to. They sat together on the uncomfortable hospital couch, hands intertwined, wedding rings catching the fluorescent light. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the quiet of 2 people processing a monumental shift in their lives. Are you scared? Nora asked finally. Terrified, Marcus admitted, but not of marrying you. I'm scared of not being the father she needs, the husband you deserve. I'm scared of failing the 2 most important people in my world. Nora turned to study his profile, this man who'd appeared in their lives like a guardian angel and somehow become their anchor in the storm. You've already proven yourself, Marcus. Every day since we met, you've shown up. You fought for her, for us. That's what family does. I've never been anyone's family before, he said quietly. Not really. My parents loved me in their way, but it was conditional. Measured. This, what I feel for you and Lilate's completely different. It's consuming and terrifying and absolutely essential all at once. Good, Nora said firmly, because that's exactly how love is supposed to feel. Tomorrow would bring the surgery, the 10% chance, the possibility that their new family might be shattered before it had a chance to truly begin. But tonight, in this quiet moment between wedding and crisis, they were just a husband and wife holding each other and holding hope. But Ethan's legal challenge was already crumbling. Within hours of the wedding, Patricia received word that he was dropping his custody petition in exchange for a financial settlement that Marcus agreed to with the contempt it deserved enough money to go away permanently, but not enough to live comfortably on for long. He'll be back, Nora warned as they signed the final papers that terminated Ethan's parental rights forever. Let him come, Marcus replied firmly. He'll find that married couples with unlimited legal resources are much harder targets than desperate single mothers. The legal crisis resolved, they could finally focus on what mattered most. Lila's surgery, scheduled for the following morning. Dr. Alvarez had assembled her team. The experimental procedure had been planned down to the smallest detail, and the 10% chance of success loomed before them like a mountain they had to climb together. That night, as they sat in Lila's hospital room watching her sleep, Nora found herself thinking about how much had changed in the space of a week. She was married to a man she'd known for 6 days. He was legally her daughter's father, and tomorrow they would either begin the long journey toward healing or say goodbye to the most precious thing in their world. "Are you scared?" she asked Marcus quietly. "Terrified," he admitted, "but not of the surgery failing. I'm scared of not being brave enough to deserve the trust she's placed in me." Nora reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "She chose you," she said simply. "Before any of us really understood what was happening, she chose you to be her father. That means something. What if I'm not enough?" The vulnerability in his voice reminded her that beneath the confidence and resources, he was just a man who'd never been a father before, trying to protect a child who meant everything to him. "You are enough," Nora said firmly. "You're more than enough. You're exactly what she needs. What we both need." As if summoned by their whispered conversation, Lila stirred awake, her eyes opening to find both her parents watching over her with expressions of fierce love and protection. "Mama, Daddy," she said sleepily, "are you worried about tomorrow?" "A little," Nora admitted. "Are you?" Lila considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "No," she said finally. "I'm not worried." "Why not, sweetheart?" "Because I have both of you now. And love makes people strong enough to do impossible things." Looking at her daughter's peaceful expression, at the man who'd become her husband and Lila's father in the span of days, Nora felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Absolute faith that tomorrow would bring exactly what they needed, even if what they needed was a miracle. Chapter 9. The Dark Hour. The morning of Lila's surgery dawned gray and overcast, as if the Texas sky itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what the day would bring. Nora woke in the uncomfortable reclining chair beside Lila's bed, her hand automatically reaching for her daughter before her eyes even opened. The movement had become instinctive over the past weeks, always checking, to make sure Lila was still breathing, still fighting, still there. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," Marcus said softly from the other chair, where he'd spent the night watching both his wife and daughter sleep. The title still felt surreal, wonderful, and terrifying all at once. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," Nora replied, a small smile playing at her lips despite the crushing weight of the day ahead. In all the chaos and fear, they hadn't had time to process the magnitude of what they'd done, not just the marriage, but the complete transformation of their lives in the space of a week. "Is it time yet?" Lila's voice was small and brave, her eyes opening to find both parents already awake and watching over her. "Soon, Princess," Marcus said, moving to sit on the edge of her bed. "Dr. Alvarez will be here in an hour to talk to us before we go downstairs. Are you ready?" Nora asked gently, smoothing Lila's hair back from her forehead. Lila considered the question with the seriousness she brought to everything important. "I think so. I'm scared, but I'm also excited." "Excited?" Marcus's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Because maybe after today, my heart will be strong enough to run and play like other kids. Maybe I'll be able to go to school and make friends and have adventures." Lila's eyes sparkled with the kind of hope that only children could maintain in the face of impossible odds. "Maybe I'll get to grow up and be just like Mama, strong and brave and beautiful." The words hit both adults like physical blows. The casual way their daughter spoke about a future that hung on a 10% chance of survival. Nora felt tears threaten, but she forced them back, determined to match Lila's courage with her own. "You're already strong and brave and beautiful," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the strongest person I know." "That's because you haven't met my mama yet," Lila replied with a giggle that sounded exactly like the carefree child she should have been allowed to be. "She's the strongest person in the whole world. She took care of me all by herself for 6 whole years. And now we take care of each other," Nora said firmly, "all 3 of us together." When Dr. Alvarez arrived an hour later, she brought with her the controlled energy of a surgeon preparing for the most complex procedure of her career. The experimental surgery would involve completely rebuilding Lila's damaged heart using a combination of artificial materials and tissue grafts, a procedure so new that only 3 other children in the world had undergone it. The surgery will take 12 to 14 hours. Dr. Alvarez explained, her voice gentle but honest. We'll need to stop her heart completely and keep her on bypass while we work. There will be critical moments where things could go wrong very quickly. What are the specific risks? Marcus asked, his businessman's mind needing concrete information even as his father's heart was breaking. Organ failure, stroke, bleeding complications, infection, rejection of the artificial components. Dr. Alvarez's voice was clinical, but her eyes were kind. Any of these could be fatal, but Lila has something going for her that most children don't. What's that? Nora asked. She has parents who love her unconditionally, who fought for her, who've given her the emotional strength to endure what most adults couldn't handle. That matters more than you might think. As they prepared to take Lila to surgery, the little girl insisted on a few minutes alone with each parent. Nora went first, holding her daughter close and whispering all the love and hope and desperate prayers that had been building in her chest for months. Mama, Lila said softly, if something happens to me, I want you to be happy. I want you to love Daddy and let him love you back. Promise me, you won't be sad forever. Nothing is going to happen to you, Nora whispered fiercely. You're going to beat the 10%, and we're going to go home and be a family. But if it does, Lila persisted with the determination that had carried her through 6 years of medical struggles. Promise me. I promise, Nora said, the words coming out broken and desperate. But only if you promise me you'll fight as hard as you can to come back to us. I promise, Mama. I love you. I love you too, baby. More than all the stars in the sky. When it was Marcus's turn, he found himself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what this small person had brought into his life. A week ago, he'd been a successful but empty man. Now, he was a father, a husband, someone with everything to lose and everything to fight for. Daddy, Lila said seriously, will you take care of Mama if I can't come back? The question stopped Marcus's breath entirely. Lila, you are coming back. We're not even considering any other possibility. But if I can't, she continued with devastating matter-of-factness, Mama will need someone to remind her to eat and sleep and not work too much. She forgets to take care of herself when she's sad. You're going to be here to remind her yourself, Marcus said firmly, because you're the bravest, strongest little girl in the world, and you're going to beat this. I hope so, Lila said simply, because I really want to see what it's like to have a daddy teach me to ride a bike and help me with homework and scare away boys when I'm older. The image of that future of normal, everyday father-daughter, moments made Marcus's chest tighten with longing and determination. I'm going to teach you all of those things and more, he promised. We're going to have a lifetime of adventures together. I love you, Daddy. Thank you for choosing to be my father. Thank you for choosing to be my daughter, Princess. You saved my life just as much as we're trying to save yours. As the surgical team prepared to take Lila away, she insisted on one final family moment. They stood together in the hallway outside the operating room, Marcus and Nora on either side of the gurney, holding their daughter's hands while she looked up at them with absolute trust and love. Remember, Lila said solemnly, no matter what happens, we're a family now, forever and always. Nothing can change that. The words followed them into the surgical waiting room, where they settled in for the longest day of their lives. 12 to 14 hours of not knowing, of hoping, of praying to every deity either of them had ever believed in. For the first 6 hours, everything proceeded according to plan. Dr. Alvarez sent regular updates through the surgical coordinator. They'd successfully stopped Lila's heart and put her on bypass. They'd begun the delicate work of removing damaged tissue. They were making good progress, but at hour 7, everything changed. At hour 8, the surgical coordinator appeared with an expression that made Nora's stomach drop to her feet. Dr. Alvarez needs to speak with you, she said, her professional composure barely masking obvious concern. There have been developments. They found the surgeon in a small consultation room, still in her surgical gown, exhaustion and worry etched in every line of her face. She didn't waste time with gentle preambles. We've encountered severe complications with the valve integration, she said bluntly. Lila's immune system is attacking the titanium components more aggressively than our suppressants can control. We're seeing inflammatory responses that are causing dangerous arrhythmias, and her blood pressure has become critically unstable. What are her chances now? Nora asked. Though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. If we can't control the immune response in the next 2 hours, we'll have to remove the new components. At that point, Dr. Alvarez's voice trailed off, but they all understood. At that point, Lila would die. She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what failure meant. Can we see her? Marcus asked, his voice strangely calm despite the chaos raging in his chest. Not yet. We need every available moment to try to save her. But I wanted you to know where we stand. As Dr. Alvarez hurried back into surgery, Nora and Marcus found themselves alone in the hallway, facing the very real possibility that their daughter, their miracle, their heart, their entire world might not survive the next hour. She's going to make it, Nora said fiercely, as if saying the words could make them true. She has to make it. But even as she spoke, alarms began sounding from within the operating room, and they could hear the controlled chaos of a medical team fighting desperately to save a small life that hung in the balance. The darkest hour of their lives had begun, and all they could do was hold each other and pray that love would be enough to bring their daughter home. Chapter 10. Miracle and New Beginnings. The alarms stopped after 3 hours of chaos, after consultations with cardiac specialists around the world, after moments when Dr. Alvarez emerged from surgery with increasingly grim updates. The sudden silence from the operating room was more terrifying than any sound had been. Nora and Marcus sat in the waiting room, holding each other, both of them afraid to breathe, afraid to hope, afraid to even think about what the silence might mean. They'd been through every emotion possible over the past 15 hours. Terror, hope, despair, rage at the unfairness of watching their child fight for her life. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. They looked up to find Dr. Alvarez standing in the doorway, still in her surgical scrubs, her face unreadable. She looked exhausted, like someone who'd just fought the battle of her professional life. But there was something in her eyes that made Nora's heart stop entirely. Doctor? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Doctor. Alvarez's exhausted face slowly transformed, but her smile was tempered with the caution of someone who'd seen too many medical miracles turn into false hopes. The surgery was successful beyond our most optimistic projections, she said. Her voice carefully measured. We managed to control the immune response using an experimental immunosuppressive protocol that we've never tried before. Lila's new heart components are functioning well, but she'll need intensive monitoring and lifelong medication management. But she's going to live? Marcus asked, afraid to believe it. The immediate crisis has passed, and her vital signs are stable. We'll know more over the next few weeks. But yes, I believe she's going to live and live well. Doctor. Alvarez's professional reserve cracked slightly. She's stronger than any of us anticipated. She's more than okay, she said, tears now streaming down her own face. Her body not only accepted the artificial components, it integrated them so completely that her heart function is testing at levels we've never seen before. It's as if her heart was always meant to work this way, as if we just gave her body the tools it needed to heal itself. Marcus felt his knees buckle, the relief so overwhelming that he couldn't remain standing. Nora caught him, and they held each other while the impossible reality sank in. Their daughter was going to live. Can we see her? Nora asked through her tears. She's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but yes, she'll be in the cardiac ICU for monitoring. But her vital signs are so strong that we expect her to wake up within the hour. The walk to the cardiac ICU felt like floating through a dream. After so many weeks of hospital corridors filled with dread and desperation, walking toward their daughter's room with hope and joy felt surreal, magical, like stepping into a fairy tale they'd never dared to believe could be real. Lila looked so small in the ICU bed, surrounded by monitors and machines. But the numbers on every screen told the story of a healthy, strong heart beating steadily in her chest. Her color was better than it had been in months, her breathing easy and natural. "Hello, Princess," Marcus whispered, taking her small hand in his. "We're here, we're right here, and we're never leaving." As if summoned by his voice, Lila's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her parents' faces hovering above her. "Mama, Daddy." Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube, but it was the most beautiful sound either of them had ever heard. "We're here, baby," Nora said, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We're right here." "Did it work?" Lila asked, her hand moving instinctively to her chest. "Is my heart fixed?" "Your heart is perfect, Doctor," Alvarez said, appearing beside them with a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "Better than perfect. Actually, you, young lady, just made medical history. Does that mean I can go home soon?" Lila asked hopefully. "It means you can go home and have the normal childhood you deserve, Dr. Forsays." Alvarez replied, "School, friends, sports, everything other kids your age get to do." The wonder in Lila's eyes as the reality of her future sank in was breathtaking. "I can really run and play? You can do anything you want to do. Marcus said firmly. Anything at all. I want to learn to ride a bike, Lila said immediately. And I want to go to school and make friends, and maybe learn to swim. Can I learn to swim, Daddy? We'll start with swimming lessons as soon as the doctors say it's okay, Marcus promised, his heart swelling with joy at the simple normalcy of planning everyday activities for his daughter. And I want to go to school like other kids, Lila continued, her excitement growing as the possibilities of her new life became real, and maybe someday help other sick kids too. That's actually something I've been thinking about, Marcus said, glancing at Nora. Once we're all settled, and you're fully recovered, I'd like to explore starting a foundation for families dealing with pediatric heart conditions. Nora stared at him in amazement. A foundation? The Lila Hayes Foundation for Pediatric Cardiac Care, Marcus explained, fully funded, focused on providing comprehensive support for families dealing with complex heart conditions, and I can't think of anyone better qualified to run it than someone who's lived through every challenge we want to help other families overcome. You named it after me? Lila asked, her eyes wide with wonder. You inspired it, Marcus replied simply. You and your mama showed me what real courage looks like, what love can accomplish when it refuses to give up. If this foundation can help even one other family avoid some of the struggles you've faced, then your fight will have saved more lives than just your own. 8 months after her surgery, following a careful recovery process monitored by specialists in both Houston and their home city, Lila was finally cleared for all normal childhood activities. The experimental immunosuppressive protocol had worked better than anyone dared hope, and her artificial heart components showed no signs of rejection. 1 year later, Nora stood in the backyard of their new home, watching her husband teach their daughter to ride the bright pink bicycle he'd bought for her 8th birthday. Lila was laughing as she pedaled across the grass, Marcus jogging alongside with one protective hand near her shoulder, ready to steady her if needed. Look, Mama, Lila called out as she found her balance and began riding confidently on her own. I'm really doing it. Nora pulled out her phone and captured the moment, this ordinary, extraordinary scene of a healthy child learning to ride a bike while her father cheered her on. After so many months of hospital rooms and medical procedures, the simple normalcy of it took her breath away. That evening, after Lila had fallen asleep in her own bed in her own room, exhausted from a day of bike riding and playing with the neighborhood children who'd quickly become her devoted friends, Nora and Marcus sat on their porch swing, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. I got the call from the lawyers today, Marcus said quietly. The Lila Hayes Foundation has been approved for nonprofit status. We can start helping other families next month. Are you sure you want to name it after her? Nora asked. Though she knew the answer, she inspired it, Marcus replied simply, and she insisted on being involved in the planning. Have you seen her presentation about making hearts happy? She's going to make an excellent board member someday. Do you ever think about how we got here? Nora asked, nestled against Marcus's side. Every day, Marcus replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. A desperate mother's plea outside a hospital. A dying child's wish to know a father's love. 10% odds that somehow became 100% certainty. It still feels like a miracle. It is a miracle, Nora said softly. Not just Lila's recovery, but all of it finding each other, becoming a family, learning what love really means. From inside the house, they could hear Lila talking in her sleep, telling someone in her dreams about her perfect day, her wonderful parents, her amazing new life. The sound was pure contentment, the voice of a child who knew without question that she was cherished, protected, and loved beyond measure. Daddy, Mama. Lila's voice called out suddenly from her bedroom window above them. Come look at the stars with me. They looked up to see her silhouetted in her window, pointing excitedly at the brilliant night sky. Without hesitation, they went inside and climbed the stairs to her room, where she was kneeling on her bed with her face pressed to the glass. Look how bright they are, she said in wonder. Do you think the other kids who need new hearts can see them too? I'm sure they can, Nora said, settling beside her daughter. Good, Lila said with satisfaction, because I want them to know that miracles are real, that sometimes when things seem impossible, love finds a way to make them possible anyway. As they sat together, looking out at the infinite sky, 3 hearts beating in perfect rhythm, Nora reflected on the truth of her daughter's words. Love had found a way through desperation to hope, through strangers to family, through a 10% chance to a lifetime of possibilities. Their story had begun with a dying child's wish to know a father's love. It had become a testament to the power of chosen family, the miracle of healing, and the absolute certainty that love, when it was real and fierce and unshakable, could indeed move heaven and earth. And in their beautiful home, with their daughter healthy and happy and dreaming of tomorrow's adventures, Marcus and Nora Hayes knew they were living proof that some fairy tales were real, especially the ones that began with someone brave enough to ask a stranger for the impossible.